And welcome everybody. Dustin Harris hanging out with you in the new studios. Check it out. Okay, not really. It's just a different office within my office. But it is a different look, so those of you who are on YouTube taking a peek at the new duds, I'm thinking about getting some things behind me. So, if you have any suggestions on what I should put on the wall behind me, I apologize, it's a little echoey. It's a brand new office for me, and you can see me jumping up and down. I'm at a standing desk. How cool is that? A little Christmas present from my wife. Thank you, wife. She's beautiful, gorgeous, wonderful, lovely, and I have nothing but great things to say about my lovely wife and my son who put it together, so I didn't even have to do that. So we're going to do the podcast standing for the first time ever. Hang on to your hats. Folks, I know we just had an episode about this topic just a couple of weeks ago. It was episode 185 called Appraisersaurus. If you've not listened to that, probably the most downloaded episode ever. I think it was shared multiple times. So take a listen to that. But folks, it happened again today, and I had to say something about it. Sorry, I just can't let it go. Okay, we're going to talk about it again today. It's a little bit of a follow-up from that last episode, but a little bit different as well. So hang on tight. First, I want to remind you we are sponsored by Anow Software. Anow is spelled A-N-O-W, stands for Appraisers Now. And folks, when I talk about Appraisers Now, I'm talking about being able to manage your office now. As an appraiser, as a business owner, putting on both of those hats, Appraisers Now, anow.com/coach. Well, folks, it happened again today. I was on Facebook. I was reading through some forums, some online forums, different appraisers saying different things. By the way, folks, if you don't participate in those forums, trust me, you're not missing much. You are missing something if you're not on the All-Star Team forum, because that's totally different, uplifting, positive, wonderful. But some of these other forums get a little bit, shall we say, in the muck. Okay, and I saw it again today. So I'm not going to go into detail about the post, other than to say the post was about talking about how another appraiser does his or her business. And there were a lot of comments, but the comment that stood out to me most, and by the way, this was the theme, if you will, of the comments in general. The comment that stood out to me most, and really why I wanted to get on the air today, was one of the individuals said, I don't care what other people do, this is just wrong. Okay, I may be misquoting it. It's not a direct quote, but I know that the phrase "this is just wrong." Those four words came up. Okay, here's my question, folks: is different wrong? That's what I want to talk about today. Is different wrong? Again, episode 185, we talked about Appraisersaurus. To recap that, again, if you haven't listened to it, listen to it. Again, probably the most downloaded episode ever on the Appraiser Coach podcast. The gist of that episode was simply to point out that there's a lot of appraisers out there. Okay, maybe not a lot. A few, some. All right, who are we kidding? A majority of appraisers out there are living in 1989. There are appraisers out there who used to do things the way that they did them, and guess what? They're still doing them that way, which is fine. I have no problem with other people and how they run their business. That's cool. I'm not going to judge someone else for how they run their business. What I'm concerned about is that we transfer this difference into equating it with wrongness. Okay, right or wrong, black and white. We get in this duality all the time as human beings. It's either this way or it's that way. There is so much gray in between. And folks, gray is not bad. Okay, it's not. In fact, I would say gray is probably a bad analogy. It's more like people see things in black and white, and there's a whole lot of color in between that we fail to see. Okay? Let me recap why I'm on the air today and my beef today. I see this quite often. I see it through my email. I see it on Facebook. I see it in person with other appraisers. I see it in people in general. But today we want to talk about appraisers, and specifically what I see is that you've got a set of appraisers out there who do things their way, their business model, and they somehow think that because their mentor taught them the way that they did, that somehow that's the right way to do it. Okay? Have you heard the analogy of the ham? I don't know whether it's a true story or not. If it's not, it should be. Okay? And it's basically the newlywed couple gets married, and Easter comes and they decide to cook a ham, and the new wife, brand new wife, just a couple months they've been married, she cuts off the ends of the ham and she puts it in the pan and puts it in the oven. And the new husband says to his beautiful new bride, says, "Honey, that's an interesting way to do things. Why do you do it that way?" And she goes, "Well, that's how you're supposed to cook a ham." And he goes, "Oh, interesting. That's really? Like, where did you get that from?" "Well, from my mom, of course." So he goes, of course, to his new mother-in-law and says, "My new wife, I love her to death, and she cuts off the ends of the ham here, and I'm just kind of curious where that comes from." She goes, "Oh, that's just how you bake a ham." And the mother-in-law, or the son-in-law, kind of challenges his mother-in-law and says, "Oh, really? Where did you learn that from?" "Well, I learned that from my mom." Well, her mom happens to be still alive, and so he goes to grandma, if you will, and says, why did you teach your daughter, and then she taught her daughter to cut off the ends of the ham? And she kind of laughs and she says, "Well, because the pans were not big enough." The analogy, of course, is sometimes the way that we do things, just because it's always been done that way, may not necessarily be right or wrong. It just happens to be tradition. Speaking about tradition, folks, I want to talk to you about the traditions in your business. How is it that you wear both the appraiser hat and the business owner hat at the same time? I can tell you that for me, for a long time, it was very, very difficult. It still gets difficult at times, but I'll tell you something that makes it a ton easier, and that is ANow software. Folks, I have people email me all the time and ask me about ANow, and their number one question is, why should I pay for a spreadsheet? Okay, folks, please understand me when I say ANow is so much more than a spreadsheet. Is it a spreadsheet? Yes. It keeps track of your orders. But folks, it keeps track of every single order and the status of every single order, so you never have a late order. Okay? You always have updates. You always know what's going on. You have notes. You have work files. You have maps. You have calendar, all integrated into the same software. Folks, it will blow you away what ANow can do. Please check them out. Go to anow.com. That's anow.com/coach. And check out ANow software and why it can transform your appraisal office. Well, folks, today we are got a brand new sponsor today. Very, very happy to welcome on board AutoResponse, autoresponse.com. AutoResponse is basically the ability for you to not have to deal with the crap that happens on Facebook. You jump on Facebook, you're in a good mood, and 10 minutes later you're not because of all the junk that you have to wade through, the comments section, everything else that's going on Facebook. You see something that you really want to comment on, you really want to make a judgment against another person. Folks, you don't have to anymore. You can now go to AutoResponse. AutoResponse will basically search your Facebook feed. It knows your preferences, and it will make the sarcastic comments for you. How cool is that? Talk about the time savers that you now have when you don't have to make the sarcastic comments yourself. You just turn it over to AutoResponse. Don't have time to judge your friends on Facebook? Get AutoResponse and never give it a second look. All right, folks, welcome back. We're talking today a little bit of a follow-up from episode 185 about Appraisersauruses, and I've basically kind of set it up this way. I was on Facebook earlier today, and one of the comments made by a fellow appraiser, one who I respect, by the way, was talking about a business model. And granted, it is a very different business model than most appraisers deal with. Okay, I'll grant that right up front. It is different. My question is the comment that was made by this respected appraiser correct? And the response was, that is just wrong. I see that quite often, folks. My challenge to you today is to help me to understand what is right and what is wrong when it comes to doing your appraisal practice different than others. Okay? Let me give you an example. I just talked to you about ANow software. Folks, when I first learned about ANow software, I was very skeptical. I get approached, as you can imagine, by a lot of different software companies, a lot of different people who want to promote their products on the Appraiser Coach podcast or on my blogs or in my newsletter, yada, yada, yada. I have to wade through a lot of products, and I have to decide, you know what, I really don't even have time to look at this particular thing. I did that with ANow. It looked to me like a product that I have seen 100 times. I really was not interested. Until I did the demo. I was completely convinced at that point. That's beside the point. The point I'm trying to make here is for the last year and a half, maybe 2 years now, about a year and a half, I guess, that I've been using Now software. It's very different than what other appraisers do in their business. And I believe it's very helpful. It makes me more efficient as an appraiser. My question to you today is that wrong? Because I do things differently than my peers, is that wrong? My guess is that you're going to say, well, of course not, Dustin. That's silly. That's just a software program that you happen to adopt. I would challenge you to take that one step further and ask you, what is wrong then? At what point is different wrong? Again, not to go into details about the business model that was taking place on Facebook, but I will tell you again that it is different than most appraisers. But my challenge would be, all of those naysayers who were talking about this particular business model, my challenge to them would be this. Could you please show me where this business model is legally, ethically, or morally out of step? Okay. Now, I know those are all loaded words. What is moral? What is ethical? Legal is a little bit easier to define because it's either against the law or it's for the law. But even then, I think there's a lot of gray area. Depends on the judge and jury and how they're going to interpret that law. Same is true with state boards. Same is true with USPAP. There's certain black and white things that you can look at, but there's also interpretations of those black and white things. Okay. So my question for you is, what is wrong? What is right? And my challenge today is to maybe have you step back for just a second as an appraiser business owner and ask yourself the question, just because it's different, does that equate to it being wrong? My challenge would be that maybe, possibly not. I can tell you this, from what I read in the original post on Facebook, and then to read all of the comments, I could see nothing that was against USPAP. I don't know about this individual's particular state law. But my guess is it probably mirrors what most state laws are. So my guess is it's not against state law. Is it morally wrong? Well, maybe in some eyes. Is it ethically wrong? Maybe in some other eyes. I don't know. But when I see someone say that is just wrong, I have to ask my question, is it wrong or is it different? Is it wrong or is it different? And my challenge again on this episode, as it was on 185, is does different equal wrong? My challenge would be possibly not. One of the reasons I've been able to be successful as an appraiser coach and as an appraiser is because I don't do things like everybody else. And I would challenge you maybe to step outside your box sometimes and say, I'm not talking about cutting corners. I'm certainly not talking about doing things that are on the edge of being morally corrupt. I'm talking about just simply looking at things from a different angle and saying, you know what? Maybe there's a different way to do these things. Successful people look at things outside the box. Successful people that I know of are successful because they don't do everything like the status quo. My challenge to you is that possibly you take a look at your business today as we get into this 2017 year and ask yourself, could there be a better way that's not wrong, that's not illegal, that's not unethical, that's not immoral? Could there be ways that you could look at your business differently? Speaking about looking at your business differently, I would challenge you this year to take another look at the All-Star team. If you're not a member of my All-Star team, I would highly challenge you to become a member. Two big things on the All-Star team. There's really three things. There's big discounts offered on to All-Star team members. But the two things that you're going to find helpful on a regular basis are, number one, the 8-page newsletter that comes out every single month. By the way, last month, the topic of the newsletter was a day in the life of Dustin Harris. And I actually took you through a minute-by-minute day, a very typical appraisal day for me, so that you could get an idea of how I do things. That's very typical of the All-Star Team newsletter. You get in to the inside of my business and why it's different than most other appraisers' businesses. But number two, as we talked about earlier, you get to be a part of a closed online Facebook group that is positive. I don't put up with any negatives. You cannot ask a stupid question in that group because you will be treated with respect. I hope you'll join me this year. It's $9.95 per month for the digital version, a little bit more for the hard copy, but $9.95 per month or $95 a year. Thanks for joining me today for another rant on basically the same issue, but something that keeps coming up. Folks, wrong is not necessarily, different is not necessarily wrong. We'll catch you next time.